Okay.
You
All right. Go
wonderful.
ahead and you can go ahead and start it, Beth. All
Okay.
right. Thanks, Jenny. Thank you guys.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the fourth and final webinar of the Justice Collaboratory's four-part series. These webinars spotlight the transformative power of partnerships with contributors to the second volume of The Notebook. The Notebook is a collection of art, scholarship, opinion, and insight that holds a divergent space in a traditional world, existing somewhere between an academic journal and a popular magazine. By blending the perspectives of academic research and lived experience, it expands the conversation about justice and safety to render a more complete picture of complex emotional issues. This volume is centered on the theme of solidarities, the people, the work, and the practices that lift our energy and bring us together. You can download the notebook for free at justicehappenshere.yale.edu, or you can also order a printed version on the webinar events page. Throughout the webinar series, panelists have shared their lived experiences, research insights, and on-the-ground strategies that illuminate how solidarities take root in addressing some of the nation's most imminent threats to safety and justice today. In case you missed any of them, all of the webinar recordings can be found on the publications page of our site. Several of the notebook's articles are centered on powerful human stories and the ability of those stories to shape and move public perception and policy. So today we're going to be hearing from two of our authors, David Gaspar, CEO of the Bail Project, and Jenny Espinoza, Executive Director and founder or co-founder of Back to the Start, about how their organizations collect and leverage stories for change. Dr. Jenny Espinoza serves as Executive Director of Back to the Start. She has served in leadership roles in some of our nation's most challenging and underserved settings, including as Chief Physician and Surgeon in California's prison healthcare system and Medical Director of a homeless veteran affairs clinic in downtown San Francisco. She previously served as primary care provider at San Quentin for 8 years. Dr. Espinoza also serves on faculty at the University of California, San Francisco, where she attended medical school and completed residency training, and is a leader in the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Culture of Health program. And David Gaspar is the CEO of the Bail Project, where he has played a key role since 2019 in building mission-driven teams and systems that center care, consistency, and impact. He began as a bail disruptor and quickly rose through the ranks, driven by a deep commitment to justice and operational excellence. Before entering the nonprofit sector, David spent over a decade leading warehouse and distribution operations for a Seattle-based company. Okay, so to get us started today, I thought it would be good to ground this conversation with a brief overview of each of your organizations and an explanation of why storytelling is so integral to your mission. David, let's start with you on that one, and then we'll hear from Jenny.
Thank you, Beth, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Most people, when they hear about the Bail Project, they tend to see us as an organization that only pays bail. But at the core of our work, what we're really fighting for is the idea that freedom should not depend on wealth alone. To me, that connects directly to our fundamental American values, the belief that justice should be fair, that liberty, our freedom, does matter, and that a person's financial situation should not determine whether they remain free before they've ever been convicted of a crime. So at the Bail Project, we do provide free bail assistance and community-based support to people who would otherwise sit in jail simply because they cannot afford to pay for their freedom. At the same time, we are working to change the policies and narratives that made that system acceptable in the first place. A lot of people imagine jail through the lens of our most extreme cases, what we see on TV, the news, and movies. But many people sitting in our jails across America are there accused of low-level or nonviolent charges and just simply cannot afford to pay their bail. What's really important, and what really magnifies the importance of storytelling, is behind those allegations are parents, workers, caregivers, and people whose lives can begin unraveling before guilt has ever been established. What I've realized is that policy conversations can become so abstract that people stop seeing the hundreds of thousands of human beings daily being inside these jails. People hear the statistics, they see the headlines, the political rhetoric, but they rarely ever hear what it actually feels like to sit in a jail cell simply because you cannot afford your freedom. They rarely think about the parent wondering who's going to pick their child up from school, or the person terrified that they may lose their job after only a few days in jail. Storytelling creates that proximity. It allows people to step into their experiences that they may otherwise never see for themselves. My own lived experience also shapes how I think about this work. Early in my life, I was also incarcerated after making decisions that changed the course of my path. I personally know what it feels like to sit in confinement and feel disconnected from the outside world. Life felt like it kept moving without me, while I continued to sink in a judicial quicksand that I didn't understand. While inside, the bills continue to pile up for families as they struggle to establish a new norm. Those children go without parents in a home, and over time, it can begin to feel like society has already decided who you are and who you will always be. That's storytelling in its own shape or form. What stayed with me most was realizing how quickly those systems can reduce people to labels while ignoring the humanity behind them. That experience shaped how I approach storytelling today and what we do here at the Bell Project. Myself and my team, when we sit with someone impacted by pretrial detention, we don't just see a case, we don't just see a story. We see the person whose story is still unfolding before our eyes. For many people, that involvement with the legal system is just one sentence in their overall story, or maybe a chapter at most. But too often, our society tries to turn them into a moment, or turn that bad moment into their full story. That's why storytelling for me is so important to our mission. It actually restores the humanity to conversations where humanity has often been missing.
That's great. Thank you, David. And Jenny, Back to the Start really was formed for storytelling. So can you tell us a little bit about how you came up with the idea for that and how that became the mission of the organization?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Back to the Start is a nonprofit that was co-founded by myself and incarcerated writers and advocates at San Quentin. And so what we do is we work with incarcerated persons, and over the course of a curriculum that lasts several months, help them to craft narratives about their childhood. And then if they're interested, we work with them to leverage their narratives for public awareness and then for policy change aimed at investing in our youth and families, trying to break that cycle of intergenerational trauma and incarceration. And so like the way we came about this was something, honestly, I would not have imagined some years ago. And so it came from a place of really getting frustrated with how the system is and how, as a society, we're not really willing to invest in our youth, but seem to be okay spending a lot more for individuals to be incarcerated after the damage is done. And so I ended up doing a really deep dive into this, and I ended up getting accepted into the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Culture of Health Leadership Program, really looking at this issue, like why over decades, despite all the data, despite all the research showing where we should be investing our dollars, what has the most ROI, the most impact, like why can't we do that? Why are, it's as a nation, we have a hard time really enacting prevention, but like why in this space? What are the gaps? And so after talking to several policy influencers and looking at it, I mean the answer ended up being pretty obvious at the end, which is that really it's our narratives that are driving our policies, not the data, not the research. Plain and simple. That's where all the policy influencers are at. And I realize also we don't have stories really in this space, especially in this early childhood space, and connecting those dots. So that was the impetus for Back to the Start. It's really a strategic initiative, but built into that, we have this trauma-informed program that's very unique and transformational.
Yeah, great. And we'll talk a little bit more about how the program actually works in a minute. But you both wrote pieces for the solidarity issue of the notebook. So that was the theme of our last issue. And David, can you talk about why your piece called Freedom Should Be Free fits so well with the theme of solidarity?
Yeah, thank you. I believe the piece fit the theme of solidarity because bail funds are rooted in the idea that communities shouldn't abandon each other in moments of crisis. Historically and currently, helping someone pay bail is often communal in nature. Families are pooling money together, churches, neighbors, and local networks come together to help someone return home while preserving the constitutional principle that people are presumed innocent until proven otherwise. So in many ways, bail funds continue that tradition. Mutual aid is not charity in the traditional sense. It is an act of shared responsibility and a reaffirmation that human rights and liberties shouldn't only exist for people with financial means. So I think sometimes we forget how destabilizing a few days in jail can be for somebody. A missed shift can actually become a lost job. A missed paycheck can become an eviction. A parent separated from their children, that causes an experience for that child and for that parent that lasts long after the case is over. And all of that happens before guilt has ever even been established. And that is important to remember in the work that we're doing and in the story that we wanted to contribute to the notebook. There's also something deeply human about people coming together for someone during their hardest moments in life. It can make a person feel seen in a moment where they might otherwise feel invisible or disposable. Sometimes just simply knowing that someone believes your life still has value can change how you see yourself. For me, that solidarity also means refusing to define people by their worst moment of their life or by a simple accusation alone. It means believing that people deserve dignity, support, and the ability to return home while they navigate the legal process. Things that if you ask people, what would you want for yourself, they would name. That was really the heart of the piece for me. So freedom shouldn't belong only to people who can afford it, and humanity should not disappear simply because someone has entered the legal system. And that's why I feel like this piece fit the notebook really well.
Great, thank you. And then Jenny, we had an interesting introduction to you all back to the start. It was kind of a last minute discovery where we found each other. We were kind of putting the issue to bed. We had all of our articles lined up, but then we learned about your organization, and we were really struck by how that your specific approach for using narratives, for really having a system to collect and deploy narratives for policy change. Can you explain a little bit about how your organization has gone about doing this, the collection and the sharing of the stories?
Yeah, so the foundation of the work that we do are our narrative workshops inside San Quentin, and we're about to expand to another institution as well. And we really want this to be a system that could be replicated at within any carceral setting. And so like this, for better or for worse, we developed this program during kind of at the heels of COVID. And we had to wait for a while to be able to launch the program because of the shutdowns and lockdowns, especially in prisons with COVID. So we had about 9 months to a year where we were planning this out. And so it afforded us a lot of time to be very strategic in what we were going to do. And so the first kind of step are our narrative workshops, which consist of a cohort of about 30 individuals, and we take them through various prompts of different kind of inflection points throughout their childhood. And at this point, we've now collected a pretty large library of stories that are specific to this space of really connecting these dots of one's childhood to where they ended up now incarcerated. And so now that we have this library, it became, we're developing strategies of how to deploy our stories. And so we do a couple of different things. So one is we have all of our stories indexed by policy sector. And so we have a team, including of some amazing interns and graduate students that have indexed all of our stories by policy sector or by different adverse childhood experiences, so that for policy campaigns, we could rapidly pool and deploy the stories. And then we also stay in touch with our participants of all of our cohorts. And so in an ideal world, when we are pulling the stories, we also are reaching back out to them, asking if they want to get involved in the campaign, whether it's through an op-ed or helping with a testimony or what have you.
That's great. David, can you also tell us a little bit about how the Bail Project actually, you hear, I'm sure, hundreds of stories a day. How do you identify the ones that you really want to capture, and how do you deploy them to the audiences that need to hear them?
Yeah, this is a great question. And at the Bail Project, we are intentional about not treating our client stories like commodities. In this work, in this field, I think just in this environment, you can feel a pressure sometimes to lead with the most shocking story or the most painful experience in order to move the public opinion. But for us, we always have to remind ourselves and remain grounded in the approach of telling stories differently. So, just really straightforward. I mean, we're not interested in exploiting people's trauma. Like, that is not the way to get the attention or even have impact in reducing someone's life to the worst thing that's ever happened to them. So, we really want to be and remain conscious of that. In this particular area, a big part of our storytelling comes through our direct relationships. Our teams actually work in the communities that they serve, their residents, along with those that they are helping to provide services to. So every day they're building trust. And many of the stories that we tell, they emerge naturally from those relationships. So what matters to us is showing people in their fullness, not just through the pain, but also through their resilience, their humor, their leadership, their love for their families, and the hope for the future. All these things tell a story that is more complete. So storytelling isn't just about changing a perception. It's also about shaping policy conversations with a more honest understanding of what human impact truly looks like. I think a lot of people would agree with this statement. Too often policy debates around bail or pretrial reform become driven by fear on both sides, isolated incidents or political rhetoric that is disconnected from real life. And stories should reconnect us to the human consequences of these systems. What it should do is reconnect us to what it means to lose your housing because you sat in jail for a few months before trial. What it means for a child when their parent suddenly disappears from their lives without notice. What it feels like to carry the emotional weight of incarceration before guilt has ever been established. Stories help bring those parts of the conversation to life. We also connect stories with research and policy analysis. Our reports like Beyond Bail, the false promise of detention, false promise of bail, detention by design, and even our Texas report on pretrial liberty, they all work to connect the lived experience with data and constitutional concerns. And therefore, our goal isn't just simply to create an emotional reaction. We're not looking for the stories of our clients to just strike an emotional appeal. We're also hoping to help people better understand how these systems function and what's at stake when policy becomes driven primarily by fear instead of humanity. So for us, when we approach our storytelling, what we really want to do is tell a story the public can actually process from a very personal perspective. We also want our clients, the people who are sharing their personal lives with us, to feel like they have consent, trust, and timing in how their stories are being told. Because sometimes the most responsible thing that we can do as an organization is protect someone's story instead of amplifying it. And so we kind of take all that into consideration.
That's great. Thank you, David. Let's talk about some of the stories you both shared in your articles. Jenny, you offered a couple of powerful case studies in your article. If anybody hasn't read it, I really would encourage you to read it, because both of these articles are almost written, especially Jenny's, as a how to go about using narratives for policy change. David's has some great stories woven in. But Jenny, you offered a couple of powerful case studies. One was about influencing California state legislation that would end indefinite probation for juveniles. Can you walk us through? I think that would be really informative for this group to hear how you went about that from start to finish.
Yeah, and I do also want to echo what David was saying in terms of the sensitivity and of when to utilize a story, and also having partnership with the individuals and the storytellers. And in our organization, I think part of their process as they're writing their stories is they are finding power in their voice, and they're coming to us because they want to be able to harness whatever power they have, and especially the power in their voice, because sometimes that's kind of the only power they have to try to effectuate change, and especially to improve things for the next generation, so that hopefully they won't have to go through what they had to go through themselves. And so the campaign that you had mentioned too, this was AB 1376, which was a assembly bill by member Mia Bonta to end endless juvenile probation. And up until then, there was actually no limits on juvenile probation. It was basically open-ended until someone turned 18 or maybe 21. And so this was a bill that, as a default, had a limit of 1 year of probation, juvenile probation, unless a judge deemed that there was reason to extend it. And so as far as the process, so first we had to identify this bill as one of our policy priorities. And so every year now, and we're pretty new, so this has been going on for now about 3 years, but we analyze all of the bills that are submitted within the state of California that cross the sectors of the cradle to prison pipeline. So whether it's education, health, foster care, juvenile justice, for example. And we kind of boil those down, and we give them to the incarcerated co-leads. And it comes down to about 100 bills usually. And they, through a process, identify our top 5 or 6 priority bills for the year. And so this was identified as one of our priority bills. We ended up with a story from Jesse Milo, and he has the longest sentence of anyone in our program, over 6 life sentences, plus 100 and something years for attempted murder. And he wrote an op-ed about going from endless juvenile probation to endless incarceration, and really talked about the toll that probation took on him and his family, and how the suspicious cycle that got created, including like house searches. Once his father was shot during a house search when he was on juvenile probation as part of his probation terms. We ended up having this story published in multiple media outlets, including the Orange County Register, the San Diego Union Tribune, basically canvassed in media outlets throughout California. And we were doing this in collaboration with the bill author, with the bill co-sponsors, and got also pushed out different social media outlets and through our coalitions. And so this, was a result of a lot of thought partnership about like strategically for this bill in particular, what do we need? What's the opposition? And the ask for us was if we could write an op-ed. So Jesse rose to the task, and he wrote an amazing op-ed, which was really, I think, instrumental in trying to push the bill forward, which at that time had some significant opposition. And I'll just like say an anecdote to that. Which is like, Jesse and others are doing this to help others. But they also, we're hoping that they get benefit from this as well in many different ways. And Jesse, he was just commuted by the governor about a month and a half ago. He had the longest sentence of anyone in the program, a sentence that was very baffling for anyone that looks at his case, I'll mention. And in light of all the amazing work he's done, including his advocacy work back to the start, he just got commuted. And so that's like just a full circle kind of for the program. And he's not out yet. It's a whole process to get out once you're commuted. But he's going to be doing advocacy now from outside.
That's amazing. Great story. Jenny, when you say he wrote an op-ed, did anybody from Back to the Start help him? Did you give him some guidance? Because that's not I've been writing op-eds for many years. It's not easy.
It's not easy. Yeah. So well, it was a process, but he basically really took the initiative on this. And so, Jesse also, he was a participant in a program, and then he was a facilitator in training, then facilitator. Now he's a co-lead. So at that time, he was like a participant for facilitator in training. And we had a meeting of what we were going to do with our policy priorities, and identified, Jesse as a candidate to write this op-ed, and he was very enthusiastic. And actually, interesting enough, we were going to meet a week later for me to get his first draft of the op-ed, and I ended up coming to San Quentin a few days later for another event. And in the meantime, we heard from our bill co-sponsors that there's some opposition. Is there any way you could put out the bill? It was like a very short turnaround, like less than a week. And I happened to see Jesse at San Quentin a few days later. And I said, is there a way we could get your op-ed sooner? And he said, I'll go back to my cell and get it for you. He had already written the whole thing. And so he went back and he gave it to me. One of our co-leads or co-founders had done a little bit of editing for him, very light editing. And then I took it back, and we had our policy interns as well. And I asked them to basically transcribe it, because it was handwritten. This is in prison. They can't email it to us. So it's the whole process. And they also made some suggested edits. And then I kind of quickly gave that back to Jesse and asked him if that looked okay, if he could approve it. And he, was happy with it. And then we kind of rapid fire submitted it. But yeah, he really took the initiative, and basically he wrote the whole thing, and just some light editing. And that's not always the case, right? It's like sometimes one of our co-leads are working kind of side by side with the participant as well. It depends.
Okay. Thank you. And David, your article also has some really compelling stories to make the case for bail funds as mutual aid, including Nicole, a 31-year-old social worker who was charged with a felony due to a case of mistaken identity. Can you briefly share Nicole's story, and then just tell us how you go about finding stories like Nicole's and the process of working with her to tell her story?
Yeah, absolutely. What stayed with me about Nicole's story wasn't just what happened to her. I think it's a horrible story, but I had the chance to actually sit down and meet Nicole months after she was released. And once they figured out there was a case of mistaken identity, and she knew at that moment that she would be able to move forward. But you just kind of shared, Nicole was a social worker, somebody who had dedicated her life to helping other people. And yet she found herself in the legal system just simply because somebody misidentified her. And so when I sat with her, it was powerful. Like, even in that moment, months later, she already kind of knew what her outcome was and was going to continue to be. But you could still hear the fear in her voice as she told her story, thinking about her daughters all over again, the uncertainty, the disruption that whole experience caused to her life. But you could also hear her strength. And I think that's what storytelling does best. And that's why I really wanted that story to be part of this notebook piece, because it moves conversations beyond assumptions and reminds people that these systems impact real human beings with careers, families, responsibilities, and futures. Unfortunately, stories like Nicole's, where a single mother and the breadwinner of her family are instantly stripped away from their family and their children's lives, it's just not a rare occurrence. And it's not even considered at this moment to be considered a sensational story. And that's really unfortunate for me because this, once again, is impacting our neighborhoods, our neighbors, in a lot of cases, our friends and family. When someone like Nicole is willing to share her story publicly, for me, it allows the audience to emotionally connect to something that they may have otherwise only understood politically or abstractly. And that connection matters because once people can see themselves or someone they love inside the story, the conversation usually begins to change at that point.
That's great. And so when you went to Nicole and said, we'd love to share your story, it's important to our organization, it's important to our mission, how was she open to it? How did you work with her to make sure that story was told in a way she was comfortable with?
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate that because, there's a respect there. And, Jenny also named it, you want to make sure that people have the ability to make choices for when and how their story is told. And we were really fortunate to be able to work with Nicole on a couple different occasions prior to this particular piece. And one of them was in writing and another one was in video content. We were able to actually, that's how I met her in person. We were able to bring her out and actually record her story in person and to be able to sit with her in space and to be able to share that conversation of what it felt like with her. So by the time we got to this notebook piece, it was like, here's another opportunity for us to highlight what that looked like for you. And are you okay with this? And by that point, Nicole's like, I really feel like more people need to hear what it feels like for a single mother to be in a situation to where she has to wake up every morning and go to sleep every night wondering what's going to happen to her children and who's going to actually take care of them. And for her, it was just such a meaningful moment to be asked again to be able to share her story in that context.
Right. I mean, so we've touched on this a bit. And in fact, I think we have one question in the chat too about it. And actually, I'm gonna read Anna's question because she asked, how do you support people as they share traumatizing stories, especially in public spaces like legislatures or the media? We've talked about just, these are real stories of impact, of trauma. How do you do this in a way without exploiting them, with making them feel comfortable and supporting them throughout the process?
Yeah, I think for us, we are a storytelling program. So, first of all, the stories are developed, are shared within the container of our workshops that are facilitated by incarcerated facilitators. And so at that point, like there's no, we're not trying to get their stories produced or published. Like this is a trauma-informed program. If at the end of the program, they also want to be able to utilize their stories for policy campaigns, then that's great. But just know, like they've really had time to process and to find some healing before they're sharing out their stories. And this is a evolution over the course of the workshops in which the individuals that come together who many times don't even know each other end up becoming very close, and they're sharing things that they've never discussed with anybody before. And so we're in the middle of a workshop right now, and I'm kind of witnessing that with the participants as a non-incarcerated facilitator. And so it's really important to create safety in that environment. And it's really, again, about trying to understand their past traumas and trying to find healing. And they do know that part of what we do, if they're interested, is to then leverage the stories for public awareness. But that's completely their choice. I think they get more and more interested and excited about it throughout the program. At the end, we are very explicit about it. If they are interested in sharing out their stories, we do have like waivers or consents that they could fill out, and they could also decide if they want to put out their name, if they want it to be anonymous, and this is not mandatory in any way. And what I'm finding is, I always tell them also, you can't guarantee that your story is going to get published, right? But I'm finding that when I go into the prison, I'm seeing people from previous classes who are coming up to me and they're asking, like, what's the update? Are you able to publish my story? They really do want to get the stories out there, but we always make sure that they know it's their stories. It's their decision if they want to share their stories. If they change their minds, they can. I mean, we can't pull back a story that already got released, but going forward, we can. And they still own their stories. They could write a book, they could write a memoir. Like, we don't own their rights to their stories. But really, like, we're seeing that their motivation is to help others. And, like, again, they're realizing they have power in their voice, and they want to be empowered in whatever way they can.
David, do you have anything?
Oh, sorry. Can I just add one more quick thing? Also, one thing that has come up where I think we're also able to fill in this gap is that in real time, especially for youth and kids, that is a very tender time to tell their stories, right? And so when we're collaborating with youth law organizations, what we're being told is, like, frequently the child and the family, they're not ready to tell their stories, and it's hard to find these stories. And so our participants in our program are kind of able to tell the stories, like, from in retrospect, to fill in that gap, whereas in real time it may not be appropriate or safe for the child in real time to tell their story.
That makes a lot of sense. David, did you have any thoughts to add to that about just how do you make people feel safe in sharing their stories?
Yeah, I'm like Jenny. This is for us. We are like bailing people out, and their cases are very fresh and active, and so this is one of the most important parts of our work. And is understanding that people impacted by the system have often had their voices controlled, distorted, or spoken over for much of their lives. But we also don't want to push them out there and say, you have to say this, you need to say this, people got to hear this, because we never want our storytelling to become just another version of somebody taking their voice and using it how they want. So consent matters, relationships matter, empowerment matters. People should understand how their story will be used, and also have space to decide what they're comfortable sharing of their story. They don't have to share it all. They don't even have to share it at all. So we like to walk that path with them. We also have to recognize that many people are still actively navigating the consequences of system involvement while these stories are being shared. So court dates, employment struggles, housing concerns, family pressures, all those things are still unfolding in real time in their lives, which means that we have a greater responsibility to protect them and not just platform them. So.
That's actually a really good point, David. I mean, there is probably a number of people that you work with that don't want their full names out there. Do you have, and I know from working with the media, sometimes without a name, you don't get as much impact. Do you have a process for telling the stories of people who don't wish to be identified?
We do, but it varies greatly. Sometimes we'll just have to wait for somebody's case to fully close, and then there will be more comfort. So people will just say, "Can we just wait?" Which is always an option. There will be people who want to wait, but then they don't want their last name, or they don't want their name, and so we try to find ways and outlets to be able to share those stories as truthfully and forthcoming as possible, while understanding, to your point, that it won't always, get to a particular placement, but it still gets their story out there. It still gives them power over their voice, and also a lot of just reclaiming of their story so that they can continue to rewrite it the way that they want it to be.
Yeah, that's great. I kind of have a two-part question for both of you, but in some ways, you all are writing or helping to craft the story and putting it out in articles such that you contributed to the notebook, Freedom Isn't Free, where it shares Nicole stories. In other ways, you're helping them get out there firsthand and share their stories firsthand. So what are, you mentioned the op-ed, which is a great vehicle for sharing a firsthand story. What are some other ways that both your organizations are giving people a platform to speak out directly? Jenny, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll go
start?
first. So our storytellers are generally still in prison, so that has some logistical barriers, of course. And we're not agnostic to one platform versus another. We really are aimed at widespread narrative change. So we're doing narrative change work with media partners on one hand, and on the other hand, we're also doing specific targeted policy campaigns, knowing that narrative change, generally speaking, takes a long time. And so, so one thing that we do is we go to the Capitol and give testimonies on bills. Even though the participants cannot come because they're incarcerated, we meet with them and we say, we're going to go and give this testimony. What should we say on your behalf? And we're literally talking on their behalf, saying these are voices from San Quentin. And maybe you're trying to save money on cutting a foster youth program, but look at the expense that we're going to have to pay by the state for incarceration. We also are, to the extent that the public information officer will allow it, like we, can try to record or film. We do have a short film that we just made. And so now we're doing some public viewings. And so that enables us to get their stories and their voices beyond the walls of the prisons. We also are looking into making a podcast, and we have some a couple of youth empowerment local organizations, and we have a concept right now that we're working on for a pretty novel podcast with the graduates from our program, really telling their childhood stories through the lens of youth in the community. And so, it varies, but just know, like, we have, we're really open to different platforms and collaborations. We're even thinking about artistically what this might look like through, let's say, dance or portraits, just trying to meet audiences where they are.
Very cool. I love the dance. David, what are some of the ways you're helping people get their stories out firsthand, and what are some of the platforms you use?
Yeah, very much like what Jenny just described, storytelling has to meet the storyteller and the audience where they are, so that's going to include written narratives, video storytelling, social media, op-eds, media partnerships, client stories, reports, podcasts, so on and so forth, short form, long form content. So for us, we try to really allow and provide for those options to be available. For our clients to be able to kind of pick and choose what feels right for them. But I also think spaces, here's a shameless plug, spaces like the Notebook matter because they create room for slower and more reflective storytelling. Pieces like Freedom Should Be Free allow us to move beyond headlines, policy talking points, and actually invite readers into the lived realities behind these systems, but also the scale of the impact that these systems are having on our communities. But I would say if there was one form of storytelling that I think really breaks through on a lot of levels, it's video storytelling. And we just recently released a video of Deja in Cleveland, Ohio. And what made it powerful was not just the facts of her experience, but the humanity she brought to the story that she was telling of herself. She actually shared a moment in her video where she hosted a poetry night for the women in jail. And in her telling that story, you could feel what the experience meant for her, both for her personal life, but also in what she felt it unlocked for her future. And that's part of like storytelling that is so impactful. And video storytelling allow people to hear someone's voice, to see their expressions, and in a lot of ways emotionally connect in ways that statistics or just words on a sheet of paper can't do on their own.
Yeah, Agree. And question for both of you, and we can go back to Jenny first. What are Back to the Start's main policy objectives for this year, and how are you using stories to influence those policies? And you can just give us like the top two or three.
Yeah, so we, not too long ago selected the top priority bills, and I'm saying we, but it's really the incarcerated co-leads after a lot of research. So there's, for example, the Thrive Act, which would give mental health assistance to youth survivors of gun violence, whether inflicted upon themselves or witnessed gun violence. We have a bill that's aimed, for example, at building out uniform curriculum at schools to teach restorative and kind of emotional intelligence skills. That's something that our participants talk about a lot, that they shouldn't have to wait for prison to learn these skills. We have also a bill that's aimed at reducing juvenile detention and trying to keep kids in the community. And I'll just mention like one other bill is aimed at trying to make it easier for children who are in court schools, so who are in juvenile hall, to then transfer credits to their school and get back into their school. And so right now we're actually in the strategy phase with working with our team. Like, what are we going to deploy for each of these policies? Like, where are the stories? Which ones are we going to do op-eds on? Just know that's in process, but we do have like some op-eds and other pieces that are planned. And this Friday, we're going to have our kind of final policy meeting as we deploy our strategy for each of the bills.
Is there any platform that you feel is best to reach policymakers? Is it video op-eds? Is there one that you would say we've got to do that to influence policymakers, or is it more of a surround sound? We need everything out there.
Well, I mean, if it's possible to meet with a policymaker one-on-one, I mean, that is going to be, I think, ideal. But we can't do that, right? So we try to schedule meetings. We try to invite them to come into the institution. I'm told that like op-eds in the higher profile media outlets, whether it's the Chronicle, the Sacramento Bee, and that does get the attention of whether it's the governor or assembly members. And I think those are tracked, and those are quite impactful. And then like what I'm told by like my media, friends and experts is just generally speaking, like as many senses as you could get into the story, the more impactful it's going to be. So if it was possible, like having something on film, for example, you could see it, you could hear it, like that would be ideal depending on like what the format is.
Thank you. David, how about you? What are the bail project's main public policy priorities right now, and how are you using story to shift them?
Yeah, right now we're continuing to push against policies that expand wealth-based detention and fear-driven narratives around bail reform. So there's just a lot of misinformation, a lot of negativity out there. And so a major part of our work is helping people understand what actually creates safety and stability in our communities. And that is support services, court reminders, housing stability, mental health support, and community connection, because all of those things, especially if they can be combined in any kind of way, are far more effective than relying on incarceration as a default response. So our policy work is deeply engaged in conversations around the growing push to expand pretrial detention through constitutional amendments. And so part of our narrative work matters so much because we want to push back against that public fear that often drives the policy, that often gets, legislators to vote yes on something that they should be voting no on. And so what we want to do is not just talk to that legislator, but we want to talk to the support team that legislator has around them, because they're not making their decisions in isolation. We also want their constituents, the people that vote them into office, to understand that there are options. And that when you think from a position of fear, you start to reduce the options that are available to you, and jail starts to feel more practical. And so that narrative telling, the storytelling is really just to push back against that, to ground the conversation, to remind people of the human impact that these policies have. And most importantly, understanding that there is no one size fits all. Some people just genuinely need mental health support, and other people just genuinely need some financial support, and they're not exclusively detached from each other either.
Yep. Excellent. We have a few really good questions from the audience. So I'm gonna read these out for our last section. If anybody else has questions, feel free to put it in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll try to get to them. With the fast pace and short time frame for public comment for policy consideration at the state and local level, we've all dealt with that. What ways can you suggest for using powerful narrative and storytelling in those quick turnarounds, and do abbreviated stories work or not?
I'll say for us, like that's why we do have this library story that we now have indexed, is so we could, with a quick turnaround, identify the stories and leverage the stories. Of course, with we already have consent also, but if we have time, we would want to work like specifically with that individual to try to refine their story for that specific policy campaign.
Great. David, anything you want to add to that?
What first comes to my mind is, don't start with the message you want to tell. Start with listening. The strongest narratives usually come from real relationships and real lived experience, not from trying to manufacture the perfect campaign language. And so the goal shouldn't be to simply change minds. It should be to restore humanity to conversations where humanity has often been stripped away. And so I think curating spaces that create room for impacted community members to speak for themselves instead of always being spoken about are truly important.
That's great. Another really good question. Since David began going in this direction, but can the panelists talk some of the effects they have witnessed that stem from encouraging the people that they work with to tell their stories? We know that telling our stories, even writing about difficult life experiences, can help people heal. Similarly, sometimes the first people who need to change the narrative about the situations are the very people who are harmed by our current policies. Do you see this type of impact in your work? Jenny, I know you have a lot of thoughts there.
Yeah. A big part of our program is the writing program, and we're told time and time again that there's something just really unique about putting stories to paper. And I think I saw another question about, like, does this happen in community? And I'll just kind of address that at the same time, just to kind of share the process. And so we divide our cohort into 3 groups. So it's a pretty intimate group of 8 to 10 individuals around a table. And for every prompt, they share their story to the whole group. And then they get feedback from the group, both like emotional feedback and processing, also feedback on the story itself. And besides the incarcerated facilitators, which are the main facilitators for the program, based on their requests, we also have outside community members that come in as outside facilitators to listen to the stories and to also give feedback. And so again, there's data on this too, and science behind like journaling and writing and the therapeutic benefit. And yeah, we're seeing this in real time. And just yesterday at our workshop, the participants were, multiple participants were saying again how healing, even mid-program, how healing and therapeutic that has been for them.
Thank you. And we have another question. Someone is asking if you could share the 6 rating prompts, and maybe you don't have to do that verbally, but how can this person find these 6 rating prompts? Because she's starting a similar project, not with incarcerated people, but with people who have gone through foster care and child removal, advocating for anti-poverty policies in Connecticut. So
I'm happy if one of you want to put my email in the chat, like any of you could reach out to me. We're happy to share our prompts. And actually now we have 7 prompts based on feedback from one of our previous cohorts to kind of add another prompt. So we have 7. And then we have pre-prompt exercises for each of our prompts as well. And keep in mind, like kind of like what David was saying, these prompts are not like designed to manufacture a story for a specific policy. The prompts are not about policy sectors. They're about aspects of their lives. And then we mine the stories that they created to see what is applicable to various policies.
That's great. All right. I am going to try to put your email in the chat here, but one more final question. Based on my interpretation of the voluminous research, there are, I lost it. There are many overlooked opportunities to infuse diverse neurodevelopmental and neurodiverse perspectives into our narratives, particularly with the misunderstood, in quotes, incarcerated populations. Is that, maybe that's just a comment. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that as far as trying to get perspectives from people who have struggled to tell their stories in the past.
I could speak to that. So we don't have any literacy or reading requirements for participants of our story, of our program. I mean, really the important thing is to get their stories, even if we're having to sit side by side with them and transcribe their stories for them. So a lot of our participants are just barely learning how to read and write, and have had trauma their whole life in school, and so we're having to mitigate that. And one of on our website, one of our story shares is by someone, his name is Alex Ross, who talks about this trauma and through story form. And then he also did a poem called Illiteracy Trauma, about his difficulty articulating himself both in school and even now for the parole board in that continuum.
Oh.
And and we're going to expand to a second site that's a site that's geared also for individual special medical and mental health needs. And so we're going to kind of lean more into that at that site, as far as working with individuals with disabilities and with low literacy.
That's great. Well, thank you all. I think we came to the end of our questions. We had some really good questions. Oh no, you answered that about the community. Okay, well, I really appreciate you all for attending, and thank you to our panelists. I hope that everyone can use this information in your own work. And don't forget to download or order the notebook. And I forgot to mention, but the beautiful art behind me is the cover of the notebook. Thank you all. And this recording of this webinar will be in your inbox shortly. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.